It was a night to remember in the world of entertainment, one of those evenings where you could feel the buzz in the air. The stage was set for a talk show that promised laughter, surprises, and maybe even a little drama. And at the center of it all were two iconic figures, Will Smith and Keanu Reeves. Both had carved their own paths in Hollywood, but they couldn't have been more different in terms of personality. Will, as always, was full of energy. He walked onto the stage with his signature swagger, flashing his megawatt smile and instantly lighting up the room. The audience erupted into cheers, clapping wildly as he took his seat behind the desk. Will wasn't just there to host, he was there to entertain. From the moment he opened his mouth, it was clear that he was going to make sure everyone had a good time. Keanu, on the other hand, entered the scene like a calm breeze on a hot summer day. He didn't need flashy entrances or booming applause to command attention. His presence alone was enough. Dressed casually in a simple jacket and jeans, he carried himself with an effortless coolness that made people curious about what went on inside his mind. As he sat down across from Will, the contrast between the two was striking. One all charisma and charm, the other quiet and introspective. The banter started almost immediately. Will, known for his playful teasing, wasted no time diving into jokes. "Man, you're like mysterious or something," he said with a laugh. "Like, do you ever get nervous? Do you ever mess up?" The crowd chuckled along, loving the back-and-forth dynamic between the two stars. Keanu smiled politely, nodding as if to acknowledge the humor without taking it too seriously. But then Will decided to push things a little further. Maybe it was the excitement of having such a legendary guest, or maybe it was just his natural instinct to keep the energy high. Whatever the reason, he leaned forward, his eyes glinting mischievously. All right, he said, still grinning. "Let's get real here. You're always so chill, man. Like, does anything actually embarrass you? Have you ever done something awkward that you regret?" At first glance, it seemed like harmless fun, a typical late-night interview where the host tries to coax funny stories out of their guest. But as the question lingered in the air, the mood shifted slightly. The audience, which had been laughing moments ago, grew quieter, sensing that this might lead somewhere unexpected. Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering the question. His expression didn't change much, but there was a flicker of thoughtfulness in his eyes. For a brief moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Would Keanu brush off the question with a witty comeback, or would he choose to share something deeper? Either way, it was clear that Will's playful challenge had struck a chord. What happened next would leave everyone talking, not just about the answer itself, but about the profound lesson hidden within the exchange. What made this moment stand out wasn't just the fact that it involved two beloved celebrities. It was the way it highlighted the delicate balance between humor and vulnerability, between teasing and respect. It reminded everyone watching that even in the most light-hearted settings, there's always room for sincerity, and sometimes that sincerity can turn an ordinary conversation into something extraordinary. As the seconds ticked by, the anticipation built. The audience leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear how Keanu would respond. Little did they know, his reply would go far beyond what anyone expected, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed it. The room was buzzing with anticipation. Will's question hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone could feel it. The playful tone had shifted ever so slightly, and now there was an unspoken tension, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Would Keanu rise to the occasion, or would he sidestep the question entirely? Keanu didn't answer right away. He sat there, calm and composed, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His eyes darted down for a moment as if he were gathering his thoughts before meeting Will's gaze again. You could tell he wasn't rattled. He'd been in countless interviews over the years and had faced tougher questions than this. But there was something different about this moment. It felt personal. "Well," Keanu finally said, his voice steady but soft, "I think we all have things that embarrass us or make us feel awkward." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But some of those things, they're not really meant for TV, you know," the crowd murmured quietly, sensing that Keanu wasn't going to give a quick surface-level answer. There was weight behind his words, even though he hadn't revealed anything specific yet. Will, who had started off teasing, seemed to pick up on it too. His smile faded just a little, replaced by a look of genuine interest. He leaned forward slightly, his earlier bravado giving way to curiosity. "Come on, man," Will joked, trying to keep the mood light. "We're here to have fun. Give us something." He laughed, but there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Now, maybe he hadn't expected Keanu to take the question so seriously, or maybe he realized that he'd stumbled onto something deeper than he'd intended. Keanu chuckled softly, nodding as if to acknowledge Will's attempt to steer things back toward humor. But instead of cracking a joke or brushing the question aside, he stayed on course. "It's not about having fun at someone's expense, though," he said gently. "Sometimes when people ask these kinds of questions, they don't realize how much they can affect the person being asked." For a split second, the room went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed quieter, their usual whirring drowned out by the gravity of Keanu's response. It was clear that he wasn't criticizing Will. He wasn't angry or defensive, but he was making a point. A subtle, powerful reminder that vulnerability isn't something to be taken lightly. Will blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. For someone who thrived on high-energy banter and quick wit, this was unfamiliar territory. But instead of retreating, he leaned into it. Okay, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "You're right, man. I'm sorry if I crossed a line." Keanu shook his head slightly, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, harm done," he replied. "But it's worth thinking about, isn't it? How we treat each other even in moments like this." The audience erupted into applause, but it wasn't the kind of applause you hear after a clever joke or a funny story. It was slower, more thoughtful, like they were processing what had just happened. People glanced at each other, nodding silently as if to say, "Yeah, that was deep." Will took a deep breath, visibly recalibrating. All right, he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let me rephrase this. What's something that made you feel vulnerable, not necessarily embarrassed, but something that really stuck with you?" This time, Keanu didn't hesitate. He looked straight at Will, his expression open and honest. "Losing someone close to me," he said simply. "That changed everything." The room froze again, this time with a collective intake of breath. No one saw that coming. Will's face softened immediately, any trace of mischief gone. "Man," he whispered, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to go there." "It's okay," Keanu assured him, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's part of life. Loss is something we all experience eventually. And yeah, it makes you feel small, like you're not in control anymore. There was no script for this, no rehearsed lines or planned anecdotes. This was raw, real, and deeply human." The audience sat in stunned silence, hanging on every word. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, completely absorbed. It was impossible not to feel moved by the honesty unfolding before them. Will, who usually dominated conversations with his larger-than-life personality, found himself listening intently. "I can't imagine what that must have been like," he admitted, his tone sincere. "How do you deal with something like that?" Keanu thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You don't deal with it, not really. You carry it with you. But over time, you learn to live alongside it, to find meaning in the pain, I guess." It was a perspective few people expected to hear during a late-night talk show, yet here it was, delivered with such authenticity that it resonated deeply. The atmosphere in the studio had transformed entirely. What began as a playful exchange had evolved into something far more meaningful, a conversation about resilience, grief, and the shared human experience. As the segment continued, Will steered the discussion toward lighter topics, clearly aware that the emotional intensity needed to ease up a bit. But the impact of Keanu's words lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. For the audience, it was a reminder that even the most seemingly ordinary moments could hold extraordinary lessons if only we paid attention. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically. What started as a playful, light-hearted interview had transformed into something far more profound. Keanu's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but delivered so gently that they felt like a comforting embrace rather than a weight. The audience, which moments ago was laughing and clapping along to Will's jokes, now sat completely still, entranced, reflective, almost reverent. Will, sensing the gravity of the moment, took a deep breath. His usual confident demeanor softened, his posture less animated, his voice quieter. "Man," he said again, shaking his head slowly. "I didn't mean to go there. I really didn't." He looked genuinely apologetic, his earlier teasing tone replaced by sincerity. "But thank you for sharing that. That's powerful." Keanu nodded slightly, offering a small smile. "It's okay," he repeated, his voice calm and reassuring. "Sometimes these conversations happen naturally, and maybe it's good that they do." There was a pause, a long one this time. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. Instead, it felt necessary, like everyone needed a moment to process what had just been said. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the raw humanity of the exchange. Even the production crew, who were usually focused on their tasks, seemed momentarily spellbound. Breaking the silence, Will leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You know, man, I've always admired how you carry yourself. You're so grounded. Like no matter what life throws at you, you handle it with grace. How do you do that? Seriously, where does that come from?" Keanu tilted his head thoughtfully, considering the question. "I think it comes from accepting that life isn't perfect," he replied after a moment. "We all face challenges, big and small. Some are harder than others, but they shape us, they teach us who we are. And yeah, sometimes it feels overwhelming. But if you let yourself feel the pain without letting it define you, well, that's when you start to grow." His words resonated deeply, not just with Will, but with everyone listening. People nodded along, some even whispering to their neighbors, "He's right," or "That's so true." It was rare to hear someone speak about difficult emotions in such a relatable way. There was no pretense, no attempt to sugarcoat the truth, just honesty, plain and simple. Will listened intently, his expression thoughtful. For once, he wasn't rushing to fill the silence with a joke or a quip. Instead, he gave Keanu space to continue. "So what helps you stay strong during those tough times?" he asked, his curiosity genuine. "Is it family, friends, something else?" Keanu hesitated briefly before answering. "It's a mix of things," he explained. "Family is important, sure. Having people around who care about you makes a huge difference. But it's also about finding purpose, doing work that matters to you, connecting with others, reminding yourself why you're here. Those things help keep me going." He paused, glancing down at his hands before looking back up at Will. "And then there's gratitude. Even in the darkest moments, there's always something to be grateful for. Focusing on that can change everything." The audience erupted into applause again, but it wasn't the same kind of applause they'd given earlier. This time it was heartfelt, emotional, almost cathartic. People weren't just cheering for Keanu, they were cheering for the message he was sharing. It was a reminder that despite our differences, we all go through struggles and we all have the capacity to find strength within ourselves. Will smiled warmly, clearly moved by the conversation. "You know, I think a lot of people needed to hear that tonight," he said. "Hell, I needed to hear that tonight. Thank you, man. Really." Keanu chuckled softly, breaking the tension just enough to bring a sense of lightness back to the room. "Anytime," he said with a shrug. "We're all in this together, right?" For the next few minutes, the tone of the interview shifted again, but not entirely back to its original playful state. Instead, it settled into a comfortable middle ground, still engaging, still entertaining, but with an underlying thread of authenticity that lingered throughout. Will asked more questions, this time steering clear of anything too personal, focusing instead on Keanu's career, his hobbies, and his thoughts on creativity. Even as the conversation became lighter, the impact of what had transpired remained palpable. Every laugh, every nod, every shared glance between Will and Keanu carried a deeper connection, a mutual understanding that this moment had transcended the typical late-night format. When the segment eventually wrapped up, both men stood up and shook hands, exchanging warm smiles. The audience roared with appreciation, not just for the entertainment value of the interview, but for the humanity it showcased. As Keanu walked off stage, the applause followed him, lingering long after he disappeared behind the curtain. Backstage, the buzz was electric. Producers, crew members, and other guests couldn't stop talking about what had happened. One stagehand muttered to another, "Did you see that? That was incredible." Another chimed in, "I've worked on this show for years and I've never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, Will returned to his seat, visibly reflective. Before introducing the next guest, he turned to the camera and spoke directly to the viewers at home. "You know," he said, his voice tinged with admiration, "sometimes you set out to have fun, and you end up learning something profound. Tonight was one of those nights, so thank you, Keanu, for being real, for being kind, and for reminding us all of what truly matters." As the show moved on to its next segment, the ripple effects of that conversation began spreading far beyond the studio walls. Social media lit up with reactions from viewers who had tuned in. Some praised Keanu's poise and wisdom, while others commended Will for handling the situation with grace and humility. Memes and clips of the interview quickly went viral, accompanied by captions like, "This is why we love them," and "Real talk from two legends." What made this moment unforgettable wasn't just the content of the conversation. It was the way it unfolded organically, unplanned, yet perfectly timed. It reminded everyone watching that even in settings designed for entertainment, there's always room for genuine human connection. And sometimes those connections leave a lasting impression, inspiring us to reflect on our own lives and relationships. Little did anyone know, this exchange would become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history, a testament to the power of vulnerability, empathy, and the courage to share our truths. The interview may have wrapped up, but its impact was just beginning to ripple outward. As the cameras cut away to a commercial break, the energy backstage remained electric. The production team, usually focused on logistics and timing, couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Even the stagehands, who'd seen countless interviews over the years, were buzzing with excitement. "Did you catch that?" one of the sound technicians asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "That wasn't just an interview, that was, I don't know, something else." Another crew member chimed in, "Yeah, man, it felt like we weren't even watching TV anymore, it felt real." And they were right. That's exactly what made the moment so special. It transcended the typical late-night format. Instead of flashy jokes or rehearsed anecdotes, it was raw and unfiltered. It reminded everyone involved that behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, these celebrities are human beings, just like the rest of us. They laugh, they cry, they struggle, and they grow. And when given the chance, they can share insights that resonate deeply with others. Meanwhile, Will sat back in his chair for a moment, taking it all in. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such profound wisdom during an interview. Usually, he was the one guiding the conversation, setting the tone, keeping things light and fun. But tonight, he found himself learning as much as he was entertaining. As the next guest prepared to come out, he leaned over to his co-host and whispered, "Man, I think that might have been one of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had on this show." His co-host nodded, smiling. You could feel it in the room. Everyone did. It wasn't just you two talking, it was like the whole audience was part of it. Backstage, Keanu stood quietly, sipping water and collecting his thoughts, despite the whirlwind of emotions that had unfolded moments. Earlier, he looked calm, almost serene. A producer approached him, gushing about how incredible the segment had been. "Honestly," she said, "I've never seen anything like that before. You handled it beautifully." Keanu smiled softly, shrugging off the compliment with characteristic humility. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about the message. If people take something positive from it, then that's what matters." By the time the episode aired later that week, word had already spread. Social media platforms were ablaze with reactions from viewers who had caught glimpses of the interview online or heard about it through friends. Clips of Keanu's responses went viral almost instantly, accompanied by captions like, "This is why Keanu is a legend," and "Will Smith brought the question, but Keanu brought the soul." Viewers flooded comment sections with their thoughts. Some shared personal stories of loss and resilience, inspired by Keanu's openness. Others praised Will for creating a space where such vulnerability could exist without judgment. One fan wrote, "I didn't expect to tear up while watching a talk show, but here we are. Thank you both for reminding us that it's okay to be human." Even critics, who often dissected celebrity interviews with a fine-tooth comb, couldn't help but applaud the exchange. Entertainment blogs ran headlines like, "The moment late-night TV got real," and "How Keanu Reeves turned a joke into a masterclass in grace." It wasn't just about the content of the conversation. It was about the authenticity that permeated every word. As days turned into weeks, the aftermath of the interview continued to unfold. Both Will and Keanu were inundated with praise, not just from fans but from fellow celebrities as well. At award shows and industry events, colleagues approached them to express admiration for how they'd handled the situation. One actor pulled Will aside at a red carpet event and said, "That interview? That was next-level stuff, man. You let the moment breathe and it paid off big time." Keanu, too, received heartfelt messages from peers who appreciated his candor. "You made us all think," one director told him during a film festival panel. "In a world where everything feels so polished and fake sometimes, you reminded us that honesty still has power." But perhaps the most touching responses came from everyday people, those who weren't famous or wealthy, but simply trying to navigate life's ups and downs. Letters poured in from fans around the globe, each one expressing gratitude for the words spoken that night. A teacher wrote to say that she'd played the clip for her students as part of a lesson on resilience. A grieving father shared how Keanu's reflections on loss gave him comfort during a dark time. A young woman recovering from heartbreak thanked them both for normalizing vulnerability. What struck many was the universality of the message. While the conversation had stemmed from a playful jab, it touched on themes that resonated across cultures, ages and backgrounds: pain, healing, connection, and purpose. It served as a reminder that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, we're all bound together by our shared humanity. For Will, the experience became a turning point. In future interviews, he carried the lessons he'd learned that night with him. He began asking more thoughtful questions, giving guests the space to open up if they wanted to. He realized that while humor and charisma were valuable tools, there was also immense power in listening, truly listening, to someone else's story. As for Keanu, he remained unchanged in the best way possible. He continued living his life with the same quiet dignity and kindness that had endeared him to millions. The interview didn't change who he was. Rather, it reinforced why people admired him so much. His ability to turn a potentially awkward moment into a teachable one solidified his status as not just a talented actor, but a wise and compassionate human being. Looking back months later, both men reflected on the significance of that evening. Will admitted in an interview that it had taught him the importance of balance, how to blend humor with sensitivity, entertainment with empathy. "Sometimes," he said, "you think you're going in one direction, and life takes you somewhere completely unexpected." That night with Keanu reminded me that those unexpected moments can be the most beautiful ones. Keanu, true to form, kept his reflections simple. When asked about the viral reaction to the interview, he shrugged and said, "I hope it helps people remember that we're all connected. We all face challenges, and we all have the strength to overcome them. If sharing my story can make someone feel less alone, then it was worth it." Ultimately, the interview became more than just a memorable moment in television history. It became a symbol of what happens when two people approach a conversation with openness and respect. It showed that even in spaces designed for laughter and entertainment, there's always room for depth and sincerity. And most importantly, it proved that sometimes the simplest truths can leave the biggest impact. Months had passed since that unforgettable night, but the echoes of the interview continued to resonate. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of internet fame, it became something bigger, something lasting. The clip of Keanu's response was shared and reshared countless times, not just on social media, but in classrooms, therapy sessions, and even workplace meetings. People kept coming back to it because it offered something rare, a glimpse into the human condition, stripped of pretense or polish. For Will, the experience left an indelible mark. He often found himself thinking about how differently things could have gone if he'd stuck to his original plan: to tease Keanu, get a laugh, and move on. Instead, what unfolded was a masterclass in adaptability and humility. It taught him that sometimes the best moments come when you let go of control and allow the conversation to take its natural course. "I used to think my job as a host was to entertain," Will admitted during a later appearance on another talk show. "But now I realize it's more than that. It's about creating a space where people feel safe enough to be themselves." That night with Keanu reminded me that everyone has a story, and sometimes all they need is someone willing to listen. He began incorporating this philosophy into his hosting style. While he still brought his trademark energy and humor to every episode, he also made a conscious effort to dig deeper. If a guest hinted at a personal struggle or a meaningful life lesson, Will would gently encourage them to elaborate. It wasn't always easy. Some guests preferred to keep things light. But when those genuine moments happened, they were magic. And each time, Will couldn't help but think back to Keanu's quiet wisdom and how it had changed the way he approached these conversations. As for Keanu, life went on much as it always had. He didn't seek out the spotlight any more than usual. Instead, he continued living quietly, focusing on his work and his passions. But the impact of that interview lingered in subtle ways. Fans who had long admired him for his acting skills and enigmatic persona now saw him in a new light, as a thoughtful, compassionate figure who wasn't afraid to share his vulnerabilities. People started approaching him differently too. At film festivals, fan conventions, and public appearances, strangers would approach him with stories of their own struggles. Some thanked him for giving them the courage to face their pain. Others simply wanted to tell him that his words had stayed with them during tough times. Keanu listened to each one patiently, offering kind words or a reassuring smile. He never sought recognition for these interactions, but those who experienced them walked away feeling seen and valued. One particularly touching encounter happened at a charity event months after the interview aired. A young man, visibly nervous, approached Keanu during a break in the program. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "Your words, they helped me through some really dark days. I lost my brother last year, and hearing you talk about loss made me feel like I wasn't alone." Keanu placed a hand on the man's shoulder, his expression soft and understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "And thank you for sharing that with me. You're stronger than you know." The exchange lasted only a few minutes, but it stayed with everyone who witnessed it. Word spread quickly among the attendees, and by the end of the evening, several others felt emboldened to share their own stories. What had started as a casual meet and greet turned into a powerful reminder of the connections we can forge when we open up to one another. Meanwhile, the legacy of the interview extended far beyond individual interactions. Educators began using clips of the conversation in classrooms to teach students about emotional intelligence and resilience. Mental health advocates highlighted it as an example of how vulnerability can break down barriers and foster empathy. Even corporations incorporated it into training sessions, encouraging employees to communicate with authenticity and compassion. What made the interview so universally impactful was its simplicity. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic revelations, just two people having a real conversation. In a world increasingly dominated by curated images and filtered realities, that authenticity stood out. It reminded viewers that behind every polished exterior lies a person with fears, hopes, and dreams. And that acknowledgement, however small, can make all the difference. Years later, both Will and Keanu reflected on the enduring significance of that evening. For Will, it remained a defining moment in his career, not because of anything he did, but because of what he learned. "That night changed the way I see people," he said in an interview. "It reminded me that everyone carries burdens we might not understand. Our job isn't to judge or poke fun. It's to connect, to support, to uplift." Keanu, characteristically humble, downplayed his role in the moment's success. "It wasn't about me," he insisted. "It was about the message. Life is hard for everyone in different ways, but we're all trying our best. If sharing my truth can help someone else find strength, then that's what matters." Ultimately, the story of that interview is a testament to the power of humanity. It shows that even in settings designed for entertainment, there's room for sincerity and depth. It reminds us that laughter and tears are not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, both essential parts of the human experience. And most importantly, it proves that when we choose to be vulnerable, to speak from the heart, we create ripples that reach far beyond what we can imagine. Decades from now, when people look back on that evening, they won't remember the jokes or the applause. They'll remember the silence, the collective pause when everyone realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. They'll remember the courage it took for one man to answer honestly, and the grace it took for another to listen openly. And they'll remember the simple yet profound truth that emerged from it all. We're all in this together.